He has everything money can buy: mansions, jets, an empire worth billions. But late at night, he sits alone staring at my photo, the woman who walked away. I'm the one thing his money couldn't keep. This is our story. If you've ever wondered if love can truly survive in a world of extreme wealth and power, hit subscribe now. My story will show you what money can and cannot buy, and why some things are worth more than billions. I never thought I'd be the girl who caught a billionaire's eye. Growing up in a small apartment with parents who worked overtime just to put me through design school, I learned early that creativity was my ticket forward. I'm Maya, and back then, I was just a creative director, trying to make my mark, juggling client deadlines, and my small team from our modest downtown studio. That night at the Metropolitan Children's Foundation Gala wasn't even supposed to be about me. I was there working, making sure the visual presentation I'd designed for the charity ran smoothly. Wearing my one decent black dress, the one I saved for client meetings and special occasions, I was busy instructing the tech crew when I felt someone watching me. Turning around, I locked eyes with Richard across the ballroom. Tall, confident, with kind eyes that didn't match his power suit. Something electric passed between us, but I quickly looked away. Men like him didn't notice women like me, but he found me later as I was adjusting the lighting near the stage. "The visuals are breathtaking," he said, extending his hand. "Richard Bennett." As if I wouldn't know who owned half the city's skyline. What surprised me wasn't his attention. It was how he listened when I spoke about my design philosophy, asking questions that showed he actually cared about the answers. I never expected the flowers that arrived at my tiny office the next day, or the handwritten note asking to see me again. I said yes, thinking it would be one dinner, one glimpse into a world I didn't belong in. I couldn't have known he'd send his driver 3 more times that week, each time with a different invitation I couldn't resist. Our worlds couldn't have been more different. His penthouse had a view of the entire city. My apartment barely had a view of the street. But when he took me sailing and told me stories of his childhood fears, when he remembered details about my mother's health struggles, when he showed up at my office with lunch just because I'd mentioned being too busy to eat, I started to forget about the billions. In those early days, it was just us, discovering each other in stolen moments between his empire building and my creative hustle. A connection I never saw coming, but suddenly couldn't imagine living without. The first time Richard flew me to Paris for dinner, I laughed thinking it was a joke. 6 hours later, watching the Eiffel Tower sparkle while sipping champagne, I realized life with him would never be ordinary. Early mornings in his penthouse felt surreal, me sketching designs on his balcony while he made calls worth millions before breakfast. "You're different here," he'd say, watching me work. "So focused, so in your element." He seemed fascinated by my creative process, something so foreign to his world of spreadsheets and acquisitions. Soon, I was attending galas on his arm instead of working them. The whispers followed us everywhere. What did a billionaire see in a regular black woman from the South Side? I felt the stares, heard the murmurs, but Richard would squeeze my hand, introducing me as the brilliant creative director who's revolutionizing digital storytelling. His pride in my work made me stand taller, but maintaining my independence became my quiet battle. When he casually suggested I could quit my little studio since he could fund any project I wanted, I firmly declined. "My success needs to be earned, not given," I told him. He seemed both frustrated and impressed by this boundary. What he didn't understand was that my career was part of my identity, something money couldn't replace. Our different worlds collided in unexpected ways, like when I taught him to cook Sunday dinner the way my grandmother did, flour covering his designer kitchen, or when he showed me how to sail his yacht, patient with my many mistakes. We built bridges between our realities, creating something uniquely ours. Yet there were moments that revealed the gap between us. When I worried about my mother's medical bills, he simply wrote a check without understanding my complicated feelings about accepting it. When I spoke about racial inequalities I'd faced, he listened but couldn't truly comprehend. Love was building a beautiful connection, but I began to wonder if it was strong enough to overcome the vastly different lives we'd lived before finding each other. Looking back, I can pinpoint exactly when things began to unravel. It wasn't dramatic, just a slow, quiet erosion of what made us special. Richard's phone started interrupting our moments more frequently. Dinner conversations became business calls. Date nights transformed into networking events where I stood smiling beside him, feeling increasingly invisible. Just one more deal, he'd promise, kissing my forehead before disappearing into his home office for hours. The loneliness in that massive penthouse was deafening. I kept busy with my growing studio, pouring my frustrations into creativity. My team had landed major clients, and I was finally seeing my vision materialize. The night I won my first major industry award, Richard wasn't there. Some emergency acquisition in Singapore. He sent an enormous bouquet and a diamond bracelet instead. I placed both in the guest room, untouched. The pivotal moment came during what was supposed to be our anniversary weekend at his Hamptons estate. I excitedly shared news about a community arts program I wanted to launch in my old neighborhood. "That's sweet, babe," he said, barely looking up from his tablet. "But why think so small? Why not fund something national? Something with real impact?" "Real impact happens one person at a time," I argued. "Not everything needs to be empire-sized to matter." His expression shifted to something I'd never seen before, a mixture of condescension and pity. "That's the problem, Maya. You still think like someone from where you came from. Small vision, small results." The words stung like a physical blow. In that moment, I realized he'd never truly seen me. Just a version of me he was trying to elevate to his world. And perhaps I'd been equally guilty, romanticizing him as more than another privileged man who measured worth in dollars and scale. Things deteriorated quickly after that. During a dinner with his investors, one asked if my urban aesthetic was inspired by the ghetto. Richard laughed uncomfortably instead of defending me. Later, his mother's subtle comments about my hair, my background, my different perspective, and his silence in response, confirmed what I'd begun to suspect. I would always be viewed as an exotic detour in his life, not an equal partner. The final straw came when he presented me with papers for a new creative agency, fully funded by him, with my name as the figurehead. "You won't have to struggle anymore," he explained, as if my journey and hard work were just inconveniences to be solved with his checkbook. That night, as he slept, I stood watching him, tears streaming down my face. I loved this man, but I was disappearing in the shadow of his wealth and expectations. 3 days later, I moved out, leaving his key and the untouched bracelet on the kitchen counter. The look of genuine shock on his face, when I told him I was leaving, showed the vast distance between us. He truly couldn't understand why his billions couldn't fix what was broken between us. The first month after leaving Richard was the hardest. I moved back to my old apartment, the silence a stark contrast to the constant hum of luxury I'd grown accustomed to. No housekeepers, no drivers, no assistants anticipating my needs. Just me, my plants, and the unfinished sketches pinned to my wall. I'd cry sometimes, wondering if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life, walking away from a man who, despite everything, I still loved deeply. His texts came daily at first. "Whatever I did, I'll fix it. Name your price. I miss you." Then the grand gesture started. A car delivered to my studio with keys and no note, jewelry I returned unopened, even an offer to buy the building my parents had struggled to pay rent in for decades. He was trying to solve with money what could only be fixed with understanding. Every gift felt like proof he still didn't get it. I threw myself into work, expanding my studio, and landing a campaign that put my designs on billboards across the city. Ironically, one stood right outside his corporate headquarters. A mutual friend told me he would stand staring at it some mornings, coffee in hand, before heading inside. The thought of him looking up at my creation while I was no longer looking up at him from his bed carried a poetic kind of pain. 3 months after our breakup, I was speaking at a design conference when I spotted him in the back row. He looked different, thinner, with subtle shadows under his eyes and without his usual commanding presence. He slipped out before I finished, but left a simple handwritten note with the event coordinator. "You were always extraordinary, with or without me. I'm beginning to understand that now." 2 more months passed, no gifts, no texts. Then news broke that Richard had stepped back from day-to-day operations of his company to focus on a new foundation supporting arts education in underserved communities. The press release mentioned inspiration from a personal relationship that opened my eyes to the transformative power of accessible creativity. I recognized my influence, but wondered if this was just another elaborate way to win me back. When he finally called, his voice had lost that slightly imperious tone I'd grown to resent. "I'm not asking for anything," he said. "I just want you to know I'm listening now, really listening, to the things you tried to tell me." We met at a small coffee shop in my neighborhood, his driver noticeably absent, his usual designer suit replaced with a simple button-down. For 3 hours, we talked without the power dynamic that had ultimately poisoned us. He spoke about therapy, about confronting his family's subtle racism, about learning the difference between fixing and supporting. "I thought I could build a life for us," he said, turning his coffee cup slowly. "But I never gave you space to build it with me. Everything was on my terms, at my scale, in my world." I saw genuine regret in his eyes when he added, "I measure everything in dollars and returns." I never knew how to measure happiness until I lost it, lost you. That conversation didn't lead to reconciliation. Some bridges, once broken, can't be rebuilt the same way. But it offered something perhaps more valuable: closure, understanding, growth on both sides. Now, a year later, I run a successful studio on my own terms. Richard and I exchange occasional messages, professional, friendly, respectful. His new foundation has funded arts programs in schools across my old neighborhood. I've dated other men, though none have quite measured up to what Richard and I had at our best. Sometimes I catch glimpses of him in the society pages, usually alone, despite being surrounded by people. A mutual friend told me he keeps a photo of us on his desk, the one from that weekend in Santorini, both of us laughing uncontrollably as waves crashed around us. Apparently, he tells anyone who asks that it reminds him of what matters most in life. They say you can't put a price on love. But Richard did. He valued his way of life, his control, his vision of success, more than he valued my happiness and individuality. Now he's a billionaire with everything except the one thing his money couldn't buy or keep: a woman who loved him for himself, not his empire. This journey taught me that true worth isn't measured in dollars, but in how we treat those we love. If this resonated with you, hit like and subscribe for more real stories about love, power, and finding your worth. Drop a comment sharing what you'd choose, love or money, and why.